Oh yes, you are welcome back to today's broadcast. In fact, in this video, I would say this is a very shocking evidence, and a very shocking evidence to prove the main reason why this country, Nigeria, is not really moving forward the way everybody is expecting, and the way other countries is moving forward. The main reason why every day it keep going backward instead of forwardness, why it will keep on going backward. In fact, it is a very shocking news, and I would like you to watch the video to the end. Don't skip any part of it so that you will understand the main truths and the main things and the hatred the Britain planted in the heart of everyone in this country, and the reason why things is not going the way it's supposed to go. So according to the headline, it says, shocking, the evidence against Nigerian government is finally out, the truth exposed. The main reason why the country is not moving forward, because that is how the Britain want it to be like. Have you seen it? In fact, this our brother, he explained a lot of things concerning the main truth, concerning the thing that is going on, starting from the pre-colonial masters down to these present days of Tinubu, and the main thing that is still happening, even though when there is another new government being in power, the way people is crying today, the way they will be crying also, because they never make Nigerian foundation to succeed. They don't want people to smile. The Britain don't want people to laugh. In fact, they want people to keep crying every day so that they will keep milking the country. And any section who tries to rise up, that section will be in trouble. That is how they destroy the foundation, and they destroy the things that keep the country moving. And that is the main reason why you see terrorists, banditry, kidnapping, and a lot of them everywhere, and corruption. It is the mother of the day that cannot end. In fact, I would like you to watch it. As you're about to watch, like, subscribe, and make sure you share it for everyone to see the truth that is in the country, the thing that is going on in Nigeria.
Let me ask you a question. What if I told you that Nigerians' political future may have been decided before independence even arrived? Not in 1960, not during the Civil War, not during military rule, but in 1950 in Enugu. Because before independence, northern leaders like Ahmadu Bello feared one thing above all else: domination of the South. They feared that the South's educational and economic advantage would allow certain politicians to control Nigeria completely once the British left. At one point, the North even threatened to walk away from Nigeria entirely. But then something extraordinary happened. Just a few years later, the exact opposite became reality. The North emerged as the dominant political force in Nigeria.
That however much we might imagine ourselves to be responsible for the happy accession to independence, we realize that above all, there is a divine providence.
And the shocking part is this: two of the South's biggest leaders, Nnamdi Azikiwe and Obafemi Awolowo, helped create the constitutional arrangement that made it possible. They agreed to give the northern region half of all the seats in the Nigerian's federal legislature. Half. The East and West combined would share the other half. Pause and think about that carefully. Two regions with their combined population, economic strength, coastline, seaports, and educational advantage accepted equal legislative power with a single northern region. Why? The answer begins in Enugu, September 16th, 1950. Why would Azikiwe and Awolowo agree to something like this? Were they pressured into it? Were they trying to save Nigeria from collapse? Or did they make a political mistake whose consequences the country is still living with today? Because when you look at modern Nigeria, how power is distributed, how elections are won, how federal appointments are shared, how resources are allocated, even how political party delegates are allocated. You can trace many of those arguments back to one critical moment, September 16th, 1950 in Enugu. And to understand why this happened, we have to go back to the beginning, before independence, before the First Republic, before Nigeria even fully understood what it wanted to become. We need to go back to the constitutional negotiations that almost broke the country apart. By the late 1940s, the British were preparing Nigeria for eventual independence, but before they could leave, they needed to answer two massive questions. Who would control power in the new Nigeria? Who will serve British interests best? At the time, Nigeria was divided into three major regions: the North, the West, and the East. Each already had its own regional government and political leadership. But independence would require something bigger, a federal structure capable of holding all three regions together. And immediately the struggle began, because everybody understood one thing: whoever controlled the federal government would control Nigeria itself. That meant the most important issue was representation. How many seats would each region have in the central legislature? And this was where the North came with demands that would completely reshape the balance of power. The North region wanted two things. First, they demanded half of all the seats in the future Federal House of Representatives. Second, they wanted revenue allocation to be based primarily on population, a system that would naturally favor them because the North claimed to have more than half of Nigeria's population. The South was alarmed immediately. The Western region, led politically by Awolowo, wanted equal representation with the North. But more importantly, the West had another major objective: Lagos. At the time, Lagos was not officially part of the Western region. It functioned separately under federal control. Awolowo wanted Lagos fully integrated into the West, and that was not a small issue. Lagos was already becoming the commercial heartbeat of Nigeria. Whoever controlled Lagos would possess enormous political and economic influence. Meanwhile, the Eastern region, led by Azikiwe, also demanded equal seats with the North. The East did not want a system where one region automatically dominates federal politics. At this stage, both southern regions resisted the northern demands. But beneath all this was something even deeper than politics: fear. The North feared the South. Northern leaders believed that if Nigeria became independent under a purely majority democratic system, the more educated South would dominate government, administration, business, and civil service. And honestly, from their perspective, that fear was not entirely irrational. At one point, Northern leaders complained that Southerners already occupied most skilled government positions in the North. They feared the South's influence would eventually overwhelm Northern society politically, economically, and culturally. So for the North, this was not just about seats in parliament, it was about survival. And that fear shaped everything that followed. The first major constitutional conference took place in Ibadan in January 1950. This was where things began to explode. A proposal had already been drafted by the British. The North would receive 30 seats, the East and West would receive 22 seats each. Even that arrangement already favored the North, but the Northern delegates rejected it immediately. They wanted more. Not simply an advantage, not merely the largest bloc. They wanted full parity with the combined South, that is half of all the seats. And when the other delegates resisted, the North escalated the pressure dramatically. They threatened to leave Nigeria entirely. Think about how serious that moment was. Nigeria had not even gained independence yet, and already one region was threatening to separate. The Northern delegates made it clear that if all their demands were not accepted, they were prepared to walk away from the Union altogether and exist separately like before amalgamation in 1914. That threat changed the atmosphere completely. Suddenly, the debate was no longer just about representation. Now it was about whether Nigeria itself would survive. And this is where the South found itself trapped. Because while the East and West opposed Northern parity, they also feared the collapse of Nigeria before independence. The British, meanwhile, were not neutral referees. This is extremely important to understand. British officials were deeply concerned about keeping the North inside Nigeria. To them, a united Nigeria was strategically and economically valuable and moreover a vehicle for maintaining British interest in Africa, and they believed that Northern cooperation was essential for stability. So instead of forcing the North to compromise, pressure increasingly shifted towards the South. The message was simple and clear. If concessions were necessary to keep Nigeria together, then concessions would have to be made by the South. Azikiwe became increasingly frustrated during the negotiations. At one point, he reportedly threatened if the North left Nigeria, they would lose access to the seaports, trade routes, and those threats revealed something important. The South was angry. The North was prepared to walk away. Those are two very different positions, and over time, that difference began to matter. Meetings ended deadlock, tensions kept rising, nobody wanted to blink first. But eventually, the pressure became unbearable. And then came Enugu, September 16th, 1950, the moment that changed everything. By this point, something had shifted inside the Eastern delegation. Probably the fear of a collapsed Nigeria had begun to outweigh the fear of Northern domination. The East faced a brutal choice: hold firm and risk breaking Nigeria apart before independence even arrived, or concede ground and preserve the Union. Azikiwe and the Eastern delegates chose unity. The East agreed to the Northern equality with the South. And once that happened, the entire balance of the negotiation collapsed. During final debates in the Council of 16 September, Eastern members spoke strongly in favor of mutual confidence between the two regions. It should be noted, the Western delegates did not openly endorse the arrangement, but crucially, they did not stop it either. They stepped aside at a crucial moment, and that was enough. The agreement passed. The North would receive half of all seats in the federal legislature. The British were surprised and could not believe what has just happened. Beyond their every expectation, the South conceded without a fight, no riot, no strike action, no nothing. The immediate danger of Northern secession had been neutralized. British interest achieved, Northern domination achieved. Azikiwe and Awolowo gave in to the North, and Ahmadu Bello won all. But what looked like a temporary compromise would become one of the most consequential political arrangements in Nigeria history. Because once you establish the structure of power in a country, the structure tends to survive for generations. And Nigeria is no exception. But this raises another uncomfortable question. What exactly did each side get in return? Because political compromises are rarely made for nothing. And this is where the motivations of Azikiwe and Awolowo began to diverge sharply. For Awolowo and the Western region, Lagos was the prize, and Lagos was not just symbolic. Control of Lagos meant political influence, economic strength, revenue, administrative power, media visibility, strategic advantage. Just as importantly, bringing Lagos fully into the western region weakened Azikiwe politically. At the time, Azikiwe's NCNC had significant influence in Lagos politics. Awolowo understood that controlling Lagos would strengthen the action group and reshape the political balance in the West. And eventually, that is exactly what happened. A few years later, Azikiwe would effectively be pushed out of Lagos politics. So from Awolowo's perspective, the compromise came with a concrete political reward. Awolowo won Lagos and would later kick Zik out of Lagos, but lost the south to the Caliphate. But the East situation was very different. Azikiwe's central objective was not Lagos, it was Nigeria itself. He genuinely believed in the idea of one united nation. For him, preserving that unity was worth major concessions, and so the East gave in. Not for additional seats, not for special protection, not for economic guarantees, but for the hope that unity itself would eventually benefit everybody. Azikiwe won united Nigeria and gifted it to the Caliphate. And this is technically when Igbos and Eastern political slavery started on the 16th September 1950 in Enugu. And this is the part of the story that still divides opinion today. Some people see Azikiwe's decision as visionary statesmanship. They argue that without compromise, Nigeria may never have survived long enough to become independent. Others see it as a devastating strategic mistake. Because once the principle of Northern parity became established, it changed the logic of Nigerian politics permanently. From that moment onwards, population became the foundation of political power. And once that happened, the North occupied the strongest position in federal politics. The consequences spread everywhere. More federal representation for the North, more revenue allocation, more political appointments, favorable educational policy, lower JAMB score for the North. Electoral calculations means North got more delegates for political party primaries, so winning political party primary elections became the birthright of the Caliphate. Over time, the system increasingly revolved around numbers and population, not merit, not capacity, not resources. And once a structure like that becomes institutionalized, reversing it becomes almost impossible, because every attempt to challenge it can be portrayed as threatening national unity. Every attempt will be voted down in the federal house where the North has a majority. Now, to be fair, it is important not to oversimplify this story. Azikiwe and Awolowo were not fools. Maybe they were operating under extraordinary pressure. Moreover, it is easy to judge historical figures decades later after we have already known the outcome. But in 1950, nobody could fully predict what Nigeria would become. At the time, the immediate danger of collapse felt real. The North was serious about separation. The British were serious about preserving unity and their imperial interest. And the Southern leaders were trying to navigate an incredible, fragile political environment. So this was not a simple choice between good and bad. It was a choice between competing risks. Do you preserve political balance and risk national breakup? Or do you preserve national unity and hope the political imbalance can be managed later? That was the dilemma. And depending on your perspective, Azikiwe and Awolowo either saved Nigeria or surrendered too much to keep it alive. But here is the irony. Even after all the concessions made in the name of unity, Nigeria would still descend into crisis less than 2 decades later. The First Republic collapsed, military coups followed, then came the Niger Delta Liberation War, and then came the Biafran Civil War, which means the compromise of 1950 did not permanently solve the fears and tensions it was supposed to address. And that is why this moment still matters today. Because when Nigerians argue about power, representations, federal allocations, regional dominance, or political imbalance, party primaries, they are often arguing about structures that were cemented in 1950 before independence even arrived. Structures born in colonial negotiation, structures shaped by fear, pressure, and political calculations. And perhaps that is the most fascinating part of the story. The future of Nigeria may not have been decided on the battlefield. It may have been decided in conference rooms, in negotiations, in compromises, in moments where the leaders believed they were serving the country without fully realizing the long-term cost of the decisions they were making. So when people ask whether Azikiwe and Awolowo sold the South, the answer depends entirely on how you see history. If you believe preserving Nigeria unity was the highest goal, then their compromise may appear necessary. But if you believe political structures, racial equality, in the 1950s, the smartest politicians in Nigeria believed they understood where power was heading. The South had newspapers, the universities, the seaports, the industries, the educated elites, industrial exposure. Everything about colonial Nigeria seemed to suggest that the future belonged to southern politicians like Nnamdi Azikiwe and Obafemi Awolowo. And yet, by the time independence arrived in 1960, it was Ahmadu Bello who had positioned the North to dominate Nigerian politics. Not Azikiwe, not Awolowo, Ahmadu Bello. And the strangest part is that many of his rivals didn't fully understand what he was doing until the game was already over. Because Bello's greatest weapon was not simply population, it was perception. The South believed the North was politically backward. They believed northern leaders feared modernity. They believed the North depended on British protection to survive politically. Some even believed Bello himself was a conservative aristocrat being manipulated by colonial authorities. They believed Bello was a puppet of the colonial masters. But what if that assumption was the greatest political miscalculation in Nigerian history? What if the man everyone thought was weak was actually the most dangerous strategist in the room? Because when you look carefully at the politics of the independence area, something unusually begin to emerge. Bello consistently got what he wanted. He maneuvered the British, he maneuvered Azikiwe, he maneuvered Awolowo, and in the end, the structure of independent Nigeria reflected Bello's priorities more than anyone else. The North got population-based representation. The North secured the largest number in the parliament. The North retained Ilori and Kaba provinces. The federal structure protected regional autonomy, and while southern politicians fought bitterly among themselves, Bello quietly unified the North behind a long-term strategy. Even today, historians still argue over how he pulled it off. To understand the answer, you have to go back long before independence. You have to go back to the old Sokoto Caliphate. One of the biggest mistakes many southern nationalists made was assuming that Western education was the only meaningful form of political training. Because the North had fewer missionary schools and universities, many southern elites concluded that northern politicians were politically inexperienced. But they misunderstood what northern Islamic education actually was. Islamic education in the Sokoto tradition was deeply connected to governance, administration, law, hierarchy, taxation, diplomacy, and social organization. This was not simple religious instruction. It was political training rooted in centuries of statecraft. And Bello was one of the finest products of that system. Born in Raba in present-day Sokoto state, Bello grew up inside an aristocratic tradition linked to Usman Danfodio. Long before Nigeria existed as a country, the Sokoto Caliphate had already governed massive territories across northern Nigeria. It had emirs, district heads, courts, tax system, military organization, and political hierarchies stretching across enormous distances. While many Southern nationalists saw colonialism as the beginning of political awakening, Bello and much of the Northern aristocracy saw the British differently. To them, the British had interrupted the already existing political civilization. Northern Nigeria was not an empty territory waiting for modern politics. It already had governing systems before colonial rule arrived, and the British quickly realized this. Unlike in the South, where colonial authorities relied more on direct administration and missionary expansion, the British governed the North through indirect rule. They preserved the emirate system because it worked. In many areas, the traditional political organization of the North was more efficient than anything the British could have created themselves. This is where Bello gained one of his greatest advantages. Before Bello became a major national politician, Bello served as district head of Raba under the native authority system. This was not symbolic leadership, it was real administration at a grassroots level. He collected taxes, supervised local chiefs, settled disputes, maintained order, and dealt directly with colonial officials. Think about that carefully. While Azikiwe was learning how to inspire crowds through newspapers, Bello was already governing people. While Awolowo was mastering political organization and legal argument, Bello was learning how authority moved from village structure upwards through real administrative systems. He understood how to negotiate with emirs. He understood how to manage ethnic tensions. He understood how ordinary people responded to power. He understood bureaucracy. He understood hierarchy. Most importantly, he understood patience. That experience mattered enormously later. Because one of the most fascinating parts of Bello's political rise is that he allowed his opponents to underestimate him. The South believed the North was dependent on British and the puppet of the British. Bello quietly encouraged that perception. It lowered suspicion. Southern politicians often treated Northern caution as weakness instead of strategy. But behind closed doors, Bello repeatedly made it clear to the British colonial masters the Northern interest came first. This is how he exploited the British. This is where the story becomes almost shocking. The British believed they were managing the North through indirect rule. Southern nationalists believed Bello was too close to colonial authorities. Yet Bello may have understood both sides better than they understood him. He knew exactly what frightened the British. They feared instability above all else. They feared rapid decolonization. They feared ethnic violence. They feared administrative collapse. Bello used those fears brilliantly to maneuver the British. While Southern politicians often confronted colonial authorities emotionally and publicly, Bello projected caution, discipline, and stability. To British officials, he appeared reasonable, patient, and responsible. He looked less like a revolutionary trying to destroy the system and more like a statesman protecting order. There was also a subtle psychological factor working in Bello's favor. Britain itself was deeply shaped by monarchy and aristocratic traditions. Bello, as a royal aristocrat connected to the Sokoto Caliphate, naturally spoke a political language British elites instinctively respected. He understood how to negotiate without appearing confrontational, and that became decisive during the Constitutional Conference of 1950s. At conferences in Lagos, Ibadan, and London, Bello pursued a remarkable consistent strategy. He wanted strong regional government instead of an overly centralized federation. He insisted that representation in parliament should heavily reflect the population. He demanded safeguards for northern autonomy, and he argued repeatedly that independence should come gradually rather than immediately. At first, many southern politicians misunderstood what was happening. They believed the North was simply afraid. But Bello was not afraid. He was buying time and using delay tactics to frustrate Azikiwe and Awolowo. This is one of the most important moments in Nigerian political history. Across Africa, anti-colonial nationalism was accelerating rapidly. Southern politicians, especially Azikiwe, desperately wanted independence as quickly as possible. Bello recognized that urgency and quietly turned it into leverage. Treacherously, whenever Bello wanted a concession, he would blame the 1914 amalgamation, and he would say, "The mistake of 1914 has come to light again." Or he would threaten separation of the northern region from Nigeria. To many Southerners, this sounded like insecurity and backwardness, but politically, it was genius. Bello presented the North as educationally disadvantaged and politically cautious. In doing so, he slowed the pace of constitutional change while extracting concessions that threatened northern influence. And then, Bello made the move that may have changed Nigeria forever. He pushed the population to the center of political representation. That single principle transformed the entire balance of power. The North possessed the largest population in Nigeria. Once parliamentary representation became tied primarily to population, the North gained a structural advantage inside the federal legislature that would shape Nigerian politics for decades. This was the moment many Southern politicians failed to fully appreciate what Bello was building, because while Bello focused on long-term northern power, the South was increasingly divided against itself. Azikiwe and Awolowo didn't merely disagree politically, they represented competing visions of Nigeria itself. Azikiwe believed in a strong central government because he saw Nigerian nationalism as the path towards unity. Awolowo preferred stronger regions because he feared domination by the North. That disagreement weakened Southern bargaining power from the very beginning. But the rivalry went even deeper than ideology. Azikiwe's growing influence in Lagos deeply worried Awolowo. Lagos was not just another city, it was the economic heart of colonial Nigeria. Whoever controlled Lagos controlled enormous political and economic influence. Awolowo wanted stronger Yoruba influence in Lagos. Azikiwe's popularity threatened that ambition. Instead of forming a united southern political front capable of challenging northern population power, both men increasingly competed against each other. The South had the advantage of access to the sea and a thriving industrial base. Awolowo and Azikiwe both were unable to maximize their leverage on the North. Lack of sea access as the North was landlocked. They failed to press this advantage to obtain any concession from the North. Any advantage the South has, Ahmadu Bello made it look like a leverage to dominate the North and demanded protection against domination. Bello watched all of this happen and he benefited from it immensely. Because while the South fragmented politically, Bello concentrated on something much larger, unifying the North. This may have been Bello's greatest political achievement. Northern Nigeria was extraordinarily diverse. It contained Hausa population, Fulani aristocrats, Kanuri communities, Tiv groups, Nupe population, and many Middle Belt ethnicities. Yet Bello largely succeeded in organizing the region politically under the umbrella of the Northern People's Congress. How? Bello's politics didn't rely solely on modern party structures. It rested on traditional systems that already existed across northern society. Emirs, district heads, native authorities, Islamic scholars, and local rulers formed a network people already trusted. In many parts of the North, the MPC did not feel like a new political party. It felt like the continuation of the existing Islamic authority. That gave Bello extraordinary grassroots reach. This is another major difference between Bello and his southern rivals. Southern parties depended heavily on modern electoral mobilization. Bello's political structure rested on both modern politics and traditional authority simultaneously. He was operating in two political worlds at once, and then he introduced one of the most powerful slogans in Nigerian political history. The North for the Northerners. To critics, it sounded dangerous. To supporters, it sounded defensive. Bello convinced many Northerners that Southern politicians wanted to dominate them through Western education, bureaucracy, and centralized government. By positioning himself as the defender of Northern autonomy, he unified conservative Northern opinion behind the NPC. By independence in 1960, the outcome was obvious. The NPC emerged as the largest political party in Nigeria. Bello controlled the largest bloc in parliament. His ally Abubakar Tafawa Balewa became prime minister. And then Bello did something unexpected. He refused to become the prime minister himself. Most politicians would have rushed to occupy the most powerful office in the country. Bello did the opposite. He remained in Kaduna as premier of the northern Nigeria. At first glance, this decision seemed strange, but it revealed something profound about how Bello understood power. He knew that the real center of political strength was not necessarily Lagos. It was the North itself. Whoever controlled the North controlled the largest voting bloc, the strongest regional structure, and the most important political foundation in Nigeria. Bello did not need the title of prime minister to dominate the federation. He already understood where real power lived, and perhaps that is why historians still struggle to fully explain him. Azikiwe inspired nationalism. Awolowo built modern political organization, but Bello combined traditional authority, administrative experience, demographic strategy, grassroots organization.
Oh yes, that is it. This is evidence, proof. Evidence to prove to you the reason why, no matter how the people struggle to build this country, they can never build it in a way that it will suit the South, North, and the West. It can never, because the foundation of the country is full of lies, propaganda, and corruption. That is why you see nothing is moving in the country. Nothing is moving. So all those people that is coming up, they will tell you they are going to build Nigeria. They are going to make Nigeria work. All those things is foul. The Nigeria is not going to work, even though 1,000 years coming, because the Britain that own this company knows the reason why they join each other's head and let people start fighting themselves and start bullying themselves every day. Just like the way we are saying, don't speak anything concerning the West, then you will see, or you speak anything concerning the East or concerning the North, the side that will benefit them or the side that is not more beneficial to them, then you will see trouble here and there. Or speak anything against each other, or just in a way let you see the reaction of each other's zone, then you will see how people will start talking about you. That is why you see no section in this country is moving. Because how can you allow your brother to move when they have already told you that if you allow them to move, that you'll be in a very big attack in nearby future. So nobody wants to allow each other to move. Everybody wants to remain the same. Everybody wants to be looking at each other like a goat. That is why you see the country is not moving forward. In fact, a lot is happening. I would like to recommend them what you think about the thing going on in Nigeria. Like, subscribe, and share it. Let others see things going on in the country. We say thank you for watching.